rights, and she promoted American trade, business, labor, and environmental standards abroad, something we can all be proud of. Her accomplishments are long, but let me just give you a few. Presidential Medal of Freedom Award winner, first female Secretary of State, she served as the U.S. Permanent Representative to the United Nations. She served as the President of the Center for National Policy, a member of Jimmy Carter's National Security Council. She's currently a professor in the practice of diplomacy at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. She is the chair of the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs. She's president of the Truman Scholarship Foundation. She serves on the U.S. Department of Defense's Defense Policy Board. And she serves right here locally on the board of the Aspen Institute. Tonight, Secretary Albright is here to share her immigrant story. And I think it offers a powerful counterpoint to the kind of policies of our present government and what we hear in the public today. She's a true American hero, and tonight, let's welcome her to the stage.
And thank you for telling everybody who I am. Because not everybody always knows. Not long ago, I was coming back from China. Chicago was the first port of entry. And I was there getting undressed for the security people. And I put my stuff on the conveyor belt. And the lady behind me said, "So where'd you get all those screw-top bottles? My bottles all leak." And so I got them at the container store. And then I was going through the magnetometer. And the TSA guard looked at me and he said, "Oh my God, it's you." I'm from Bosnia, and we all love you in Bosnia. And if it weren't for you, there wouldn't be a Bosnia. And you're welcome in Bosnia. And I said, "Sure." So we screw up the whole line, and I go back, and the lady of the screw-top bottle says, "So what exactly happened here?" And I said, "Well, you used to be Secretary of State." And she said, "Of Bosnia?" I am honored to be here and delighted to lend my support to the vital work of English in Action. And as we've already seen tonight, this organization is transforming the lives of English language learners and their mentors throughout this wonderful Roaring Fork Valley. It's also, I believe, sending a message that the members of this community are determined to help one another, and that we intend to continue building our solidarity day by day, session by session, until no immigrant is made to feel unwelcome or denied the opportunity to succeed. In this effort, everyone can help and clearly has, some with money and some with ideas and some with the ability to teach and to mentor. English in Action needs every volunteer, and we need participation, and really you all have been fantastic. We need doers, not doubters, and yes, we need dreamers. Our theme tonight is immigrant stories, and I've been asked to share mine. So on the first, President Clinton invited the cabinet up to Camp David when we first were named. And he said, "Tell me something about yourself that I don't know." And I said, "My name is not Madeline Albright. My name is Maria Jana Kordolova, and I was born in Prague, Czechoslovakia." I was born 2 years just before Hitler's troops marched into the capital city of Prague. My father was a diplomat, and we managed to leave in March 1939, and we fled to England, where my father joined the government in exile, where we spent World War II. I spent a lot of time in air raid shelters, waiting for the all-clear sign, and I cheered when the Americans arrived. I was 8 when the war ended, and we returned to Prague, and my father was made ambassador to Yugoslavia. The little girl in the national costume that gives flowers at the airport, that's what I did for a living. Then my father didn't want me going to school with communists, so I had a governess, and I got ahead of myself, and so my parents then sent me to Switzerland to school. I did not speak French. They wouldn't feed me if I didn't ask for it in French, so I learned French. My father then was given a new post because he was a professional diplomat, and it was to be the Czechoslovak representative on a new commission to do with India and Pakistan over Kashmir. And then in February 1948, there was a communist coup. And my father didn't want to work for the communists, and his best friends in Belgrade were the British and American ambassadors. And they said to him, your country's just had a coup, and if you resign, they'll name some communist and nothing will happen. So why don't you just take the job and report to us? Which he did. And so I don't have a terrible story about how we got to the United States. We came on the SS America, and I arrived on November 11th, Armistice Day, 1948. And I remember being scared, even though as we passed the Statue of Liberty, I found it really hard to believe that we were coming to America. And I didn't know really what was going to happen. My father came a little bit later. He defected and asked for political asylum. And when I was in office, the State Department gave me the letter that he wrote to Dean Acheson begging for political asylum. At the time, the Rockefeller Foundation was finding jobs for Central European intellectuals or whatever, and they found him a job at the University of Denver. We had no idea where Denver was. As we were driving across America, my mother said, this is really flat. And they said that Denver was the mile-high city, so maybe we're going the wrong direction. We ultimately were followed out with our few belongings by a Mayflower moving van, so my father always said we arrived on the Mayflower. I did not have the same language problems that the wonderful people that we heard from tonight. I had grown up bilingual in England, and I learned to speak Serbo-Croatian and English. I did speak English, but with a very English accent. I didn't speak American. And so it was right, we were coming just to Thanksgiving, and we were singing We Gather Together, and all of a sudden I heard somebody asking for God's blessing, and from then on I asked. We did move to Denver, and all I wanted to do was to be a bona fide American. I worked very hard to chew a lot of bubble gum, asked my mother for sleepovers, which was a hard concept to explain, and tried to figure out how to fit in with my parents in this wonderful area. And it wasn't easy because they were, quote, very ethnic. My father wanted to fit in Colorado, which meant fishing. The only problem was that he fished in a coat and tie. My mother was the most delightful nut and said whatever occurred to her, and she, at parties, she would read people's palms. And she would sit next to some man while his wife was sitting on the other side and predict that he would have many affairs. She also predicted that I would have 3 sons and I have 3 daughters. And so I did grow up in this wonderful state and spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to fit in. And as I said, my father and mother were serious and very ethnic. My father, shortly after he arrived, wrote a short story about a displaced person called Mr. D.P. Discovers America. According to the tale, it was the little things that made a difference. And so what happened, and this is hard to explain to people these days, in 1948-49, nobody walked. And my father loved to take walks, and somebody would constantly be stopping to offer him a ride, and he didn't want to do that. And so when he finally started taking the rides was when he became an American. He also had never heard about allergies. There are no allergies in Europe. But finally, when my mother became allergic to some kind of soap powder, she became an American. And when we found out that we liked to watch TV and couldn't live without Howdy Doody, we became Americans. So pretty soon the whole family felt very much at home. But I have to say it wasn't easy because we really did keep our own customs at home. We ate a lot of Czech food. My mother wore an embroidered leather jacket lined in sheepskin that she bought in Yugoslavia, which nowadays might be considered chic, but in 1950 definitely was not. I never did invite anyone to my house for a meal or to spend the night because we were embarrassed. I was a refugee and we lived in a very small house and we didn't have what, and happened. To top it off, I have to say my parents were charming, and my father sang Czech, Slovak, and Serbian songs, and we entertained a lot of people. And I must say that we loved Denver, and my mother on a regular basis would say there are just only two great cities in the world, Prague and Denver. And we read the Denver Post, which said, "'Tis a privilege to live in Colorado." We used to drive through the mountains all the time. I actually learned to drive between Denver and Aspen. And so when Aspen Institute started, what happened was that they used local professors as resource people. So I've been coming here since I was a teenager. And so this is a very special place. When I did not become a citizen until 1957, which was between my sophomore and junior year at Wellesley College. And I had gone to school in Denver. I did speak English. And one day I'm at Wellesley, and all of a sudden, freshman year, they had this kind of way that they announced visitors, and they said, "Madeline Corbell, come down. There are some ladies here who want to take you into Boston to show you what the American girl wears." So I came down in my Bermuda shorts and knee-highs, and the thing that had happened, and I hadn't focused on it, that I basically was registered as a foreign student at Wellesley. And there was something called the Cosmos Club, and people would talk about how they had learned where Wellesley was, and I said, well, two of my high school teachers went to Wellesley. In January of years at that time, aliens had to register at the post office. And so my classmates put up posters all over my room saying, "Alien, go register." But it was very much, I became a citizen and took my oath of office, oath of citizenship at the Denver courthouse in 1957. I have to say that my father used to say the following thing that I think described everything. He said that when we were in England during World War II, people would say, "We're so sorry, your country's been taken over by a terrible dictator. You're welcome here, what can we do to help you, and when are you going home?" When we came to the United States, people said, "We're so sorry, your country's been taken over by a terrible system. You're welcome here, what can we do to help you, and when will you become a citizen?" And my father said, that is what made America great. Experiences, I understood very early that international affairs was not just another academic subject. And these convictions were only strengthened for me during my years of service, both as ambassador and as Secretary of State. And I never will forget being sworn into that job and walking in for the first time into my new offices on the 7th floor of the State Department. To get down the hall, it is mahogany and it's lined with portraits of the former Secretaries of State, all of whom were men and differed from each other only as to whether they were clean-shaven or had beards. And I thought to myself, when my portrait goes up, maybe the walls will shake a bit. And they actually did. And I was just telling Madeline my story. My youngest granddaughter, when she was 8 years ago, said, "So what's the big deal about Grandma Maddie being Secretary of State?" Only girls were Secretary of State because of Condi and Hillary. And now there are a lot of little boys that well, they were encouraged by John Kerry. I'm not, but I have to say the following thing. My favorite activity has been giving out that naturalization certificate at the ceremonies. And the first time I did it was on July 4th, 2000 at Monticello. I figured since I had Thomas Jefferson's job, I could really do that. And I'm giving the certificate, and all of a sudden I heard this man saying, "Can you believe it? I'm a refugee, and I just got my citizenship naturalization papers from the Secretary of State." And I went up to him and I said, "Can you believe that a refugee is Secretary of State?" That I am technically a refugee, and as I said, we didn't have some terrible story. I do know, I can't pretend that I have a story that is as difficult or similar to the wonderful ones that we heard today. But I do know what it's like to be uprooted and unable to return to one's home, and I can't imagine what it would have been like to be turned away at the door, treated as a potential threat, or even worse, separated from my parents. So I am deeply saddened by what has been happening on our borders. And I am equally horrified by what is occurring in Europe, where extreme nationalist movements are vilifying foreigners and sowing fear in order to gain power. Amid all the hysteria, it's important to emphasize two key points. All immigrants, legal or not, are people who want to improve their lives. I do think that if people have a choice, they do want to live where they were born, but if they can't, they need to have help. Decade after decade, the United States has been enriched by the steady flow of mind and muscle, culture and creativity that America's promise has attracted to our shores. Today, we see the contributions of immigrants everywhere in the vitality of our neighborhoods, the health of our economy, the strength of our democracy, and the enduring miracle of unity. Yes, there are some who resent all this. They think that the day after they entered is the day the door to America should have been shut. But we must pray that day never comes, because our nation needs the continued refreshment of new sources of energy and strength. Those who fear change should bear in mind that the movement of people from their homes, the leaving behind of possessions, familiar sights, memories, and ancestral graveyards does not occur without good cause. And I can attest from my own experience that most of us would prefer to remain in places where we know the names and can speak the language and understand the customs. So as much as I believe in maintaining high levels of legal migration, I also believe it's vital for leaders to work across international boundaries to minimize the number of people who feel that they need to leave home. And this requires building healthy democracies, fostering peace, and generating prosperity from the ground up. Success in that endeavor demands a way of looking at the world that recognizes the humanity we share with one another and the interests that nations have in common. Those who are content to look inward and who see no higher purpose than to shield themselves from the different, the new, the unknown, will be of no help. But those who encourage people to look outward and who see meaning in building human connection between the different and the unknown will be absolutely essential. This is where English in Action comes in. Because whether through individualized tutoring, open hours, small group tutoring, or community engagement, you make it possible for people to understand one another, and if we understand one another, it is that much harder to demonize one another. When you participate in the programs such as English in Action, you're accepting a solemn responsibility, not only to live in our democracy, but to participate in it, to help build stronger communities, to educate yourselves about issues of public concern, and to look out for your neighbors. And all this matters because the America of tomorrow will only be as vibrant as we make it. The United States has a proud past, but its future depends on us. I'm often asked if I'm an optimist or a pessimist. I'm an optimist who worries a lot. I'm an optimist because I believe firmly in the ability of humans to learn from history, to create economic and political arrangements that work for the benefit of all. But I also know this will not happen automatically. We cannot assume that governments will make the right choices, nor can we assume that the forces of enlightenment and freedom will prevail. Good intentions can lead to unintended consequences. Those who feel threatened by globalization can be counted on to make their fears known through nationalism, protectionism, and isolationism. Others will continue to see the 21st century as a battleground for refighting the cultural and religious wars of the past. To succeed, and indeed to survive, we must, above all else, be true to ourselves. Today's apostles of hate put their faith in the power of the sword and of the mob. They are the spiritual descendants of tyrants and despots who once controlled the vast majority of societies here on earth. Fortunately, most American people subscribe to a different and more uplifting faith. We find our model in those who crossed the sea in search of religious freedom, authored the Bill of Rights, abolished slavery, and brought down the Berlin Wall. We believe in the rights and responsibilities of the individual and in the power of each of us to make a difference, whether the field is politics or business, education, or the law. There is much in life and world affairs that's complicated, but this is not. As a child in Europe, I learned early in life that evil exists in the world. But I also learned early about a country across the sea where the rule of law was cherished and freedom's allies helped and defended. Because of this nation's generosity, I was given the chance to grow up in freedom and to serve in the best job that I could ever imagine. Almost 70 years have passed since I first came to this country, but I have not forgotten the fundamental lessons taught to me by my parents, and that is to honor and value liberty, and never to take for granted the blessings that come with living in the world's greatest democracy. Over the years, I have seen this message reinforced countless times in the lives not only of immigrants and refugees, but also those of millions abroad who have been shielded by American soldiers, aided by American assistance, and inspired by American ideals. The American journey is an upward journey. Together, our nation defeated Hitler, outlasted Stalin, and helped make democracy possible on every continent. Today, we have to look forward, not with trepidation, but with determination to see that our adversaries fail in their purpose of destruction, and that we prevail in our purpose of building a freer and more just future for ourselves and for all people. Thank you all so much for your attention.
Thank you, Secretary Albright. Now, just before I start this, I have to say it's a little surreal. My mom has been asking me to ask you about a pin question the whole night. We're going to skip the pin question, at least for now.
Okay.
And what we did, just so all of you in the audience know, is we crowdsourced some questions from some of you in the room, from others in Aspen and other areas, focused on immigration. And so I'm going to go through a series of questions that I think aren't the questions you've maybe been asked for the past couple weeks. I hope, but I'm sure you've been asking at some point. So the first is from Jim Calloway, who we have to recognize.
Great friend, wonderful man.
Jim's good to be here tonight. This first question is from him. You talk about the need for a sensible immigration system and the need to support countries across the world to strengthen their own societies. What do you see as the most pressing issues that will drive immigration over the coming decades, and what ought the U.S. to be doing to address these policy issues?
Well, first of all, Jim has really been wonderful, and I've spent a lot of time with him in the past, mostly in Carbondale, but it is wonderful to be here, and we have a lot to thank him for. Let me just say, I think that the issues that are out there We live in a very, very difficult era where a lot of the rules and institutions that we live by have fallen apart in many different ways. I think we know that the causes of immigration at this stage, and probably the one that has created the most immediate immigrants, are the ones that have been coming from the Middle East, where there have been wars, some that were justified, some not, that have in fact created a lot of people that are not able to live in the countries where they were born. I do, by the way, believe in bipartisanship, and I have just done a major task force with Steve Hadley, who was the National Security Advisor for President Bush, on the problems of the Middle East, the crisis in the Middle East that has spread out of the Middle East, and a lot of those people have moved into various parts of Europe. Then there are the problems in this hemisphere, where we have recently seen an awful lot of movement, primarily out of Central America, and people that are not able to make a living and do what they need to do, and some because they're afraid of the terrorism and the drug dealers and a number of different aspects. The other great cause of immigration is climate change, and that people are not able to live where because there's been desertification in Africa, there's not enough water, and so people are moving out of those areas. There's something technical that is always hard to understand. There is a difference between a refugee and an immigrant. And refugees are people that fear for their lives because of threats, and immigrants are those who want to leave in order to make a better life. But I don't know whether that's a totally fair description, but that has been the law. The other part, I have to say, I have driven across a lot of America. We are a very large country, and we have plenty of room.
So in your travels across the world, we've been trying to fix an immigration system in this country for a long time. What other countries have an immigration system that you think the U.S. should emulate? And by extension, what countries are doing a good job caring for democracy?
Well, I think that there, at the moment, probably is no country that has a perfect immigration system. And one of the things that bothers me as I look at what's going on in Europe, the fact that we have lost our moral authority on this subject makes it very hard for us to tell them what to do. I have to say by the way, one of the best things about no longer being in the government, I can actually answer the questions. But I do think the following thing, I also don't have to be diplomatic. One of the things that I've seen in Europe, for instance, as I said, I was born in Prague, Czechoslovakia. The countries in Central and Eastern Europe came into existence after the end of World War I. And they were put together on the basis of national identity. And people were very proud to not be part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire or something anymore. But I have to say I'm deeply troubled that countries that many of us worked very hard to help them in their democratic movements are now closing their doors. Hungary is a perfect example of this, Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. So I think we need to look at this as an overall problem, that we are not very good about understanding that, as I said earlier, people don't leave just because they want to leave. It takes a lot to leave, and I think that we need to establish fairer laws on this.
Thank you. Shifting gears slightly, what moment in your immigrant story gave you the drive and passion for political justice and equality?
Well, there wasn't a moment, but it was the whole story. I mean, first of all, I think my parents were remarkable because we were refugees twice, basically. And I was trying to explain this to my own children, is that they made the abnormal seem normal, which is not easy for the kinds of things that happen. But I think the thing that I have been motivated by is to give back. There is no way to describe what it was like to be here and to be raised in freedom and to be able to talk. As I said, international relations was not just an academic subject for me. But I can tell you this, there is nothing that gave me more pride than to sit behind a sign that said the United States, and to understand that we did have the capability and power to make a difference for other countries if we spoke up and if we explained that foreign policy was not foreign, that it really explains the basis of American life. And so I describe myself flat out a grateful American.
So many English in action adult learners do not have language skills or education that your family had when you moved to Colorado. What role do you see for language and education in building effective immigration policy and national identity?
I think it's absolutely crucial. I obviously believe in people speaking more than one language. And I'm very proud of the languages that I speak, and my parents spoke with a very thick accent. I do have to tell one of my Colorado stories. My parents really did have very strong accents, and as I said, my father fished. So we were up at Maroon Bells one time, and he actually caught a fish, and there's a lot of echo there. And he kept saying, I got the bun, I got the bun. And then all the teenage boys there, every time they caught a fish, would say, I got the bun, I got the bun. But I do think that one of the things that does, in fact, make you part of a country is learning the language of the country while maintaining your own language. But it does help in terms of being a part of the culture. And so I do think it's very, very important. I do believe in multilingualism, but I do think that knowing the language of the country makes a big difference.
Thank you. Our current immigration system is incredibly complex and seriously flawed. Can you reflect on the limitations of the current system? What types of changes would you recommend to the system?
Well, let me just say, every country does have the right to have an immigration system. That is one of the sovereign rights of a country. And I have to say that the United States has gone through a lot of very bad phases. And I think that if one looks at the history of the internment in a variety of aspects, I don't think everything about it has something to make us proud. But I do think there are ways of trying to figure out not to keep out people of certain ethnic backgrounds, or we have had some where it was a matter of taking white Europeans and not thinking about others. And so I do think there has to be some assessment. I do think it is useful if people are willing to take to learn things, and I do understand the value of some of the visas that go to people that are highly qualified and things that we need. But there has to be a fairness to it. I think it can't kind of have arbitrary action where all of a sudden you decide X people have to be kept out because of their religion. And also then the fear factor. And so the thing that I'm very troubled by is that we seem at the moment to be incapable of having an immigration law. And I do believe in a legal system. And this is, I have to say, it's unfortunate. President Obama, President Clinton before, it was very hard to have an immigration law. I think now, to hold it up over whether we do a wall, and we're separating children from their parents, and the part that is out there right now is the United States is planning to cut down the number of people that can come in instead of expanding it. And as I said, it makes it impossible for us to go tell the French or whoever to take more people. So I think we need to have our system needs to work to have a fair, comprehensive, and has to be comprehensive election law, and it requires cooperation between the executive and legislative branch.
To give these people in the room a little hope. I think you have a lot of hope actually walking out of this room. But what one thing specifically would you recommend we in this audience do, single action we could take to help spur a change in U.S. immigration policy? I sense your answer, but...
Yeah. Well, first of all, I do think programs such as English Action makes a difference because it shows that communities are more than willing to accept people that come here, that the people who come here are more than willing to learn and become a part of those societies. But I also think, and let me just say this, I feel very strongly, just generally, about what is going on at this point. And basically, I have written this kind of bland sounding book. What I've said is basically we have this saying, see something, say something. I've added to that, do something. And I think that we need to speak out, and we are a democracy. We're about to have elections. And I think people need to participate. And I can tell you what it's like in countries where they take away your right as a citizen. And I think that one of the problems here is at the moment, we're just kind of thinking, well, this will go away. And that immigration laws will just kind of happen. And the power of a democracy is for people to make their views clear. And I think that's what we have to do. And it isn't, I mean, this is English in action, but it's also democracy in action. And I hope very much that people take that up.
Secretary Madeline. I want to bring up our news today.
Secretary Albright. Secretary Albright, it's my honor to present to you a brooch from English in Action. Building community while while honoring diversity for this evening. And it's made by a local artist named Susan Walker, who's here tonight. Combining both natural elements and man-made elements. So.
Thank you all very much. And I so consider myself a part of Colorado and the story of this country, and I thank you all so much for being here, and thank you for everything you've done for a remarkable program. Thank you.